Welcome to the Lantern Cinema Podcast, part of a film society for the initiated, people who love to discuss cult, revival, and classic films and film history. Today we'll be discussing 1982's Fitzcarraldo by Werner Herzog. I am Chris B. Genie. Joining me as always are Dustin and Hannah Harmson.
Hey! Plus one super special guest today, Will Foley, who is someone we've known basically through Lantern, right, Will?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So he's just someone who immediately, like, the cool thing about doing all these events is I get to kind of suss out all the movie people in town. And so Will immediately is talking about, Putney Swope. We were talking about screening Putney Swope and Robert Downey Sr., and he's obviously well versed in Werner Herzog, which is why he's here today, albeit remotely. And we ended up screening his short Narcissus Paints before Putney Swope, kind of juxtaposing the two. And
it was before Killing of a Chinese Bookie.
Killing of a Chinese Bookie, that's right.
But I worked at the floor too. That's kind of how I heard about you guys, because it was like, we'd always have these screenings, and then, we're trying to have these cool screenings at the floor, and then it's like, oh, Lantern Cinema is like showing Eraserhead and like beating us out, So I was like, oh, what are these guys doing? And so, yeah.
Yes. So exactly. No, it wasn't. You're right. It was 100%. We were talking about John Cassavetes.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, rolling back on that. Sorry about that, Will. We just know that he loves movies, and we like having people who love movies on the podcast. So welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I think we talked about, I think we got into me and Dustin started talking about our Werner Herzog Kinski collection, and I think that's kind of how this happened, maybe. I don't know. But thanks for having me.
And real quick, before we finish this thought, your short, Narcissus Paints, was so fucking cool, man.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, it was really interesting. It was like this weird mix of kind of like the Downey kind of aesthetic in terms of these really funny moments, but then also, especially the ending of it. There's just these really great cinematic moments of just like, I don't know why I'm feeling so intense right now just from this visual. So good on you, man. That was awesome.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thanks for sharing it with us before it had even been screened.
Oh, it was like so fun. I actually still have the poster from the night like up here in my room, and it was so cool to open that have that short open up for Killing of a Chinese Bookie, and just even see Killing of a Chinese Bookie like with a room full of people is like, a dream come true, totally.
Yeah, and it seems like Killing of a Chinese Bookie has been one of those movies that, like, as people go through our posters, they see it and they're like, that's fucking awesome, you did that movie. So it seems to be a smoke signal.
That one, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. And ultimately, I know, like I said, I think with Will, it was just a really good pairing because he likes Cassavetes and he likes movies. But on top of that, I think Cassavetes is like a dog whistle kind of for movie people. It's like, if you like Cassavetes, you gotta have good taste.
Yeah, it was funny. Some of the people in the audience for that movie, I remember one guy being like, I don't know what he said. He's just like, well, that movie was interesting. And it's just funny. I don't see how somebody could think that movie's weird. I don't know. I just think it's so good, It's,
that was the theatrical cut.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But then I also feel like that was a movie where there was only maybe, 15 people or 20 people there, but every single person was so stoked to leave it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good Lantern night.
Those are almost the best.
Yeah.
Where it's not necessarily the most crowded screening, but it's the most enthusiastic.
It's like intimate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've talked about how much fun it is to have 15 people or 40 people in a room watching a movie together, I think Hannah has some new announcements for October for our screenings.
Yes, come join me in some rooms to watch some movies. Okay, so a lot of people have asked about Halloween because it's one of my favorite things to organize, and I think it's one of people, there's so many people, especially now, I find, who are deeply into the horror genre. So I decided, and we decided as a group, to kind of make a mini festival at Vaudeville Muse. So this will be on October 30th, which I've said before and complained about many times. In Des Moines is Beggars Night. We don't trick-or-treat on Halloween. We do it the day before, and we have to tell jokes. But our mini horror fest will be 3 fantastic movies. I think that have a lot to contribute to film history. They're stylish. They're just cool. So come check those out. The first one's going to be Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. The second will be Night Tide, a film by Curtis Harrington. Very cool, very sexy. And the last one, because it's so frequently requested and because it's one that I love so much, Night of the Living Dead.
Hell yes, which has that new 4K transfer, which is so fucking looked so amazing. So we're so excited to screen that one.
Mm-hmm. So, mini Black and White Horror Fest at Vaudeville Muse on the 30th of October. Come check it out. There will be more details coming soon on that one, but I'm especially excited for this Halloween. Now, as we said before, Will is very graciously joining us today, and our podcasts are always more fun the more inclusive they are. We get more people, we get more opinions. So we're excited to have him to talk about Herzog today.
Can I just say, I've had like huge FOMO on your guys' events. Like this Halloween Fest sounds so fun, and when I saw you guys were doing Phantom of the Paradise, right?
Hell yes.
Oh, how was that? I've never seen that movie, and I was like, oh, I would have loved to see it at the.
Actually, didn't we? I think one of those days when you were still in Des Moines, still working at the floor, you might have brought up Brian De Palma at one point. Yeah. So no, I'm sad you weren't there for that, but yeah, it's.
It was a complete party, dude. It was
I bet.
It's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah, Ben Goddard from the Des Moines Film Society did an amazing pre-show talk for it. And it was like one of those movies when it was all said and done, people were so excited leaving there.
Oh, yeah, like I had never seen it. I feel like a lot of the audience hadn't seen it, but had like heard about it. Like they knew they should be there. And the music was amazing. I think everybody, myself included, enjoyed it.
Yeah, you would have loved it, man. But
I bet.
Well, he had to go and leave us and go to Austin.
Yeah, I know. I don't even know why. But, you know,
hey, how is Austin? How are you doing down there?
Oh, it's fine. It's cool. There's a good video store near me, so and a lot of good. There's a lot of good screenings. There's like a good movie to see every day. There's like 11 movie theaters here, but none of them have that Lantern Cinema charm. So still.
Well, and that's the goal. Like with the Lantern, it's like, why don't we have that? There are people who would see all these screenings. So anyway,
yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Before we start our Fitzcarraldo discussion, we should probably announce what we're doing next.
So our next guest next Saturday, which we are kind of, herd of turtles podcasters because we all have full-time jobs and other things, but we're getting right to it with our next guest, who is very important to me, very important to Dustin and myself. He is an artist, a musician. He's one of the founding members of the Moldy Peaches, and everything he does is interesting, funny, striking, and sometimes just bizarre, which is, again, a lot of things that I love. So, next Saturday, and released to you shortly thereafter, we are going to be talking to Mr. Adam Green to discuss Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast and his own film, Aladdin.
Yes. So we're very excited for it. Will, have you seen any of his movies at all?
I haven't, no.
They're all on YouTube for free, so you'll have to check it out. But being a fan of Putney Swope and all that kind of stuff, dude, it's like right up your alley. So
he was a founding member of the Moldy Peaches?
Oh, yeah, dude.
He's like the
Moldy Peach.
The guy.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. I'll definitely check that out. His latest movie's Aladdin. Yeah.
Yeah, if you do, make sure to text us right away. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Okay, yeah.
Aladdin and The Wrong Ferrari, the first iPhone movie.
Okay.
Okay, without any further ado, should we fucking start Fitzcarraldo?
Let's
do
it.
Okay, before we see it, let's all sit down and we'll watch the trailer now.
What happened? The Pongo? We are drifting into the Pongo! Cholo!
Watching a trailer that I think shows you the entire plot of the movie.
The entire thing?
Pretty much.
The movie.
Well, of course, there's no dialogue in this trailer. It might be one of the few trailers that I've seen that has absolutely no talking whatsoever.
Like a little bit of shouting when the ship is going down late, and that's kind of it. Then it's just...
Yeah, it's like every major shot from the film is what it seemed like.
It's like an international trailer, since this movie, like, the language of this movie is so important, and how many different languages are represented by the cast and everything. I wonder if that's the reasoning for that.
Do you think they had a hard time just figuring out what the definitive version was, the German or the English? So they just said, fuck it, we can't figure it out. Let's just... We'll just show images. I thought it was a really amazing trailer, but I was curious. I don't remember off the top of my head. Do you guys remember seeing Herzog's name in it at all?
No, I don't think so.
I think it just had the movie title. And
I think it just had that PowerPoint graphic Fitzcarraldo.
Will, what would you say? Is it a trailer that speaks to you?
Yeah, I kind of like Chris said. It just kind of the sort of the highlights of that movie. It has the that like amazing helicopter shot in it, which is like maybe the best hehelicopter shot ever.
I just said the same thing. Yes.
That one makes me
But honestly, if I were to have like known about that movie from that trailer, I don't think I would have been as interested in it. Like I guess the trailer didn't really like grip me super strong. I didn't really like catch exactly what was going on, like the allegorical aspect of the movie, I guess, which is like a huge part of it. But yeah, I mean, good trailer.
Herzog, yes. I guess one thought that I had, and obviously we're going to discuss, a lot of this today, but Fitzcarraldo, you can literally say the title of this movie to people who are into films, and they will just be like, there's all kinds of thoughts that come in. This is like a movie where the mythology might be bigger than the movie itself. So
exactly, yeah.
So we're looking at this, how many years past 1982, and we're looking at this trailer. There's so much history that no trailer could probably live up to it. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
So with that said, Chris, we talked about this as we were viewing it together. Good luck, my friend, breaking down the synopsis of Fitzcarraldo, Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo.
Yeah, I'm going to try to jump into this and not butcher it or make it obnoxiously long. But the film centers around a character whose name I still need to look up because I can't picture this being the name of the person playing the character. But Brian Sweeney Fitzgerald.
There you go.
An Irishman living in Peru, a failed businessman who tried to strike it rich with a railroad and that fell through. But he still has these like amazing, immaculate dreams of success and wealth and opera. He is like more into opera than most people are of most things, and he wants to bring an opera house to the city that he lives in Peru and try to like make it better, and has like all of these European things that he wants to be able to bring there. And he decides that while railroad is not his thing, maybe the rubber business would be. He talks to a rubber baron who is just stupidly wealthy and just like throws money away and burns it or just does crazy stuff because it means nothing to him. He feeds fish money because that's what you do when you have too much money. Anyway, it gets into this political stuff and how the government breaks down who can get land where and where the rubber is. And he's showing Fitzcarraldo this map, and it's like, oh, what's this little area that's tucked away? Oh, hey, there's rapids there. That's why nobody can get there. Like, you can't get a boat there. It's a disaster. Don't think about it. And this delusional Irishman is like, I'm going to do the thing that nobody else can do. I'm going to go down there. I'm going to take a boat down one river, and then we're going to carry it over a mountain to the other river, get to the rubber, make millions, sing opera. And it doesn't go that well for him.
I mean, spoiler.
But the cast of the opera there at the end will sing a song. He has a fancy chair. But he doesn't have the opera house. He's like not any richer than he was when he started, really.
Yet he brings the opera to Iquitos.
And he made some friends along the way.
Richer in spirit.
Yeah, this is a real heartstrings, warm and fuzzy type movie.
That is the biggest fucking cigar I've ever seen in my entire life at the end of that movie.
Biggest cigar, immaculate red carpet chair.
It looks like he's smoking a piece of driftwood. Chris, I think you did a terrific job. I don't think there's anything I could.
That was great.
Yeah, I think that would be a very difficult movie to do this. So, dudes, everybody here, we're discussing Werner Herzog, and oh my God, is there a living director now who has a more interesting past/mythology that I can think of? Is there anyone that even holds a candle to Herzog?
He's like one of those only directors of like that kind of like 70s Mount Olympus, that's like still around and working and like making, not only working, but making like really challenging stuff, though his past few movies have kind of been like, but it's because he's like pushing it, you know what I mean? So that's like not a bad thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think something else too, like Ebert said something. Ebert said that he thought.
I had that.
Oh, go ahead, say it.
No,
I don't have the quote, so say the quote.
Okay, I will. Roger Ebert said that for Herzog, even his failures are spectacular.
Yeah. Essentially, he's just saying like he's one of the most like influential living filmmakers happening, because no matter what, Herzog has this quality that you watch a Herzog movie, and I would be willing to bet like after you've seen a few of them, you could probably just like guess like this is probably Herzog. He has some kind of quality in these movies where you're just like, Jesus fucking Christ, what are we watching right now?
He lives every experience in those films. I mean, that's something I think that is truly unique to him. We'll talk about the concept of ecstatic truth and all this other stuff, but for the most part, I mean, when we're talking about a man hauling a boat over a mountain, this is something where, Herzog's there every day. He's in the jungle.
Oh yeah, Herzog impressions are going to abound, I'm sure, in this episode.
That's the extent of my Herzog impression. Yeah. the word jungle.
It's good, huh? Yeah.
But he's there, like he's getting eaten alive by mosquitoes and working alongside everybody else and spending months, and I'm not going to say it again, but
yes, in the jungle.
He lives it. And there's this part, what's the documentary he made about the internet called?
Lo and Behold.
Okay, Lo and Behold. There's this point where he's talking to Elon Musk, and he's talking about the idea of sending, men to Mars, and he says, I'd take a ticket. Like he would go. He said, and he means it. He would take a one-way ticket to Mars. That's the kind of director he is.
Yeah.
He's like the most adventurous, he's like the adventurer, like the Columbus of directors or something,
The adventure. I think that's a great way to put it. And I think there's so much mythology around. I mean, forget Fitzcarraldo. Let's just his entire work. There's so much mythology around him. I find myself being in positions of like, how much of this shit that you're saying is true about your life could possibly be true?
Yeah.
There's like so many amazing stories and quotes. We could go down just like a brief little list kind of informally. This is a man who ate his own shoe to encourage a fellow filmmaker to finish a film. Morris, right? Isn't that who it is?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So he did eat a shoe because he said he would. This is a man who walked across a country because he thought that it would make his mentor and fellow filmmaker continue to live. Whether or not he succeeded in making that person live, I don't know.
I don't think she's still alive. She?
I think it's a she, yeah. Yeah, she definitely probably lost that battle with life eventually. So, anyways, but he did do the walk. This is a man, did I say he was shot live on camera before?
No, have you guys seen that?
I didn't know that. When was that?
He's doing an
or should we
interview.
avoid
Oh,
seeing
it is not bloody. It's just like he's so nonchalant. Like that's what I'm sorting through a lot of my personal feelings about Werner Herzog in this whole process, but seeing him get shot while he's interviewing, and then just be like, like, and
I got the quote. Can I say the quote?
Yes,
he
please
looks
do.
down. He looks down at his stomach, and like, you know, fucking everyone else in this whole room is like, you know, on the floor or whatever, like freaking out, like what happened? And he says, "It's an insignificant bullet." Because that's another thing. Everything Werner Herzog says is like the best thing that Werner Herzog could say.
Oh
Yes.
my god, yeah. See, go ahead, sorry.
I think the most upsetting part to him was that like his pants got ruined.
Will, have you heard this? That Joaquin Phoenix was in a car accident in L.A. and essentially what happened, he was in a really bad car accident, and then all of a sudden, you know, he's like just figuring out what's going on, and he hears a rat-a-tat-tat on the window. He goes and looks, and who is it? Werner Herzog.
Oh my god. It's unbelievable.
And you know, Joaquin Phoenix is like, holy fuck, it's Werner Herzog, essentially in his mind. And, you know, Werner says, "You need to calm down." And then he says, "No, dude, I'm calm. No, I'm totally calm." "No, you're not." And then he fucking breaks out the window and like saves Joaquin Phoenix. And that's a fact.
Oh my god. That's insane.
During Fata Morgana, I don't know if I think he was either like jailed or that might have been another time. I think he was jailed actually for a pretty long time. So anyways, there's like fact after fact after fact we could say about Werner Herzog.
I also think it's important that he once said that WrestleMania is so important that we should not avert our eyes. Just throwing that out there too.
And actually, one more thing while we're kind of in this informal Herzog piece, you know,
does this get formal?
Well, I don't know. I don't think so. I feel like we're on a riveting start here. Did you guys see the Kanye West music video where it's just all of the naked celebrities in bed? Does anyone remember this?
Oh, yeah. Famous?
Yeah, famous people. So it's like naked Kanye has himself, might be first, and then it goes to like Caitlyn Jenner, and then it's Bill Clinton, and then it's like it keeps going down the line of just seeing these weird, like kind of dead naked celebrity Madame Tussauds things. Anyways, Werner Herzog came out and said that if a student put this film in consideration for my academy, I would immediately add him. He thought it was like the most amazing video ever.
Interesting.
So to WrestleMania to Kanye West. I told you, I'm doing the impression the entire time.
And you know what? It's a good impression.
I do think we overdo it sometimes.
Are you saying that I did?
No, I'm saying yours is better.
Yeah. Well, actually, this will be a good point to get into, you know, in terms of my personal, how I even got hip to Herzog. I think Dollars to Donuts, one of my favorite films of all times, is Grizzly Man. Grizzly Man is a movie that I have watched, this documentary all about Timothy Treadwell and the Bears and the Grizzly Maze. Anyways, it's a documentary that, I don't know, when did that thing come out? Like 2005?
2005.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I have watched it more times than any other movie. As we're talking about it now, I wish that I could leave this conversation and just go watch it. I like it.
So watchable.
Yeah, and people are always like, oh, it's so fucked up. It's a movie about someone going through mental illness. I hear ya. Or they'll say like, it's a movie about, you know, someone getting swallowed by a bear. I hear you. However, it feels like a movie that's about so much more to me. I don't know what it is about that film. But in case you haven't seen it, everyone go watch Grizzly Man. But I got hip to Grizzly Man around that time. And I don't know what it was, but one year around my birthday, I got like a certain sum of money where I was like, oh, they just put out Shout Factory Mercury just put out that whole fucking box set of Herzog, and it was like, what is it? It's like 16 movies or something. It's certainly like all the classic movies. And I got it, and it was like with each film, I would just kept having these moments of like, man, Herzog is like the best director I've ever seen. And so, Will, this is the box set that you had but had to sell, correct?
No, I have a different box set. I have it with me here. It's just the Kinski. It's Kinski, like Herzog Kinski, and it's the six. Yeah, it's the 6 movies they made. The 5 narrative ones, and then the My Best Fiend, the documentary.
Which is amazing. Which we have to talk about My Best Fiend. But Will, what was your first Herzog? I'm curious.
I honestly think. I used to rent DVDs off of Netflix, you know, and
off the Netflix, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then recommend, like, just a trail of recommendations led me to that, and then the story about led me to Fitzcarraldo, I think, was my first. But you know what? I actually saw Grizzly Man with like a bunch of my like high school buddies, not knowing like anything about Herzog. And I loved it, and I've seen that movie like 8 times. I watched that movie like last week. It's such an interesting. He's such a weird director because he has like such a distinctive narrative style, and then but has like twice as many documentary movies as he does narrative movies, and they're like equally artistic. You know,
my God.
They're like not journal. Like I watched an interview of him at a documentary film festival. He was like, all these, I'm not going to even try to do the impersonation.
Now we all want to, yeah.
but he's like, all these documentaries showing here are like, they're journalism, and I hate it. And, and he's like, nobody, like, he's like, make art with it. He's like, when I make a documentary, it's not a journalistic piece. I try to make it art. And I think it's so like, you can tell it's like all of his especially what documentary did I watch recently was Land of Silence and Darkness. Have you guys? Yeah.
Hannah, briefly describe that for a second. That had a deep impact on you, I remember.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of his movies do. They just stick with you in a really interesting way. And I think a part of that, we're all kind of circling around this ecstatic truth idea. So really quickly, Land of Silence and Darkness is a film about a blind deaf community.
Can they speak? I think it's like all the senses, right? Blind, deaf, and they don't speak, right?
I don't know if they're all mute or not.
Some of them can speak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because remember there's the woman who kind of translates for the other blind and deaf.
Yes, that's right. I remember. Yep.
And it's just, he just shines a light on a way people exist that a lot of us can't imagine. When I say that, it sounds like it's this terrible existence, and he shows some of the painful parts of that, but it's also just kind of a documentary about the day-to-day of what it's like to live that way. And there are just some moments that are so touching and beautiful that might fit into that idea of ecstatic truth. Can I talk to that really quickly?
Yeah, please do. So there's definitely some characteristics that you can tell you're watching a Herzog movie, and as you discover it, you will, immediately get drawn into this concept of the ecstatic truth. So, which I'm still in the process of understanding now. I think I've experienced it, but never been able to intellectualize what it means. So I'll be interested to hear.
Well, briefly as I can make this, Herzog believes that truth is so subjective, essentially. The way a journalist sees something is still going to have a slant to it. And I think if we all try to take in the world that way, that's beneficial to us, because we have to realize that everyone comes from their own perspectives and experiences. So for him, ecstatic truth is making something that's real, but adding elements that you might refer to as fiction to make it feel more real and feel truthier. There's truthiness. So what he actually says, maybe his words would be best. He says that truth is mysterious and elusive and can be reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization. So a journalist is going to show something with as little bias as possible, because that's what journalists are trained to do, while he makes something that tries to feel as true as possible. So Dustin had an example about some of the cast from Fitzcarraldo.
I do, actually. I'll hit that one with Fitzcarraldo, but before I do that, since we talked about Land of Darkness, I think, is that how you say it, Land of Darkness?
Silence and Darkness.
Silence and Darkness. I think that was the first time I think I might have experienced this idea of ecstatic truth. So in the end of that film, I'm pretty sure the final segment of that movie, doesn't it end with one of the people, you know, that are deaf and blind? Isn't this person just like touching a tree?
Yeah.
She just touches a tree, and it's like this.
He's interviewing a woman, and then he just kind of. That's right.
It's just like a static shot of just this person interacting with this tree, and you have a moment of just like, oh my god, I'm so emotional, and it's communicating something to you only the way that cinema can, right?
It's very visceral. Like, you don't know why you feel the way you do sometimes watching his films, but.
And actually, Will, to your credit, I think, you know, we talked about Narcissus Paints. The ending of your film, where there's the paint that's just going around the room. I had that exact same, you know, thought of just like, I was surprised that I was having an emotional reaction to something primarily that was kind of humorous, but now it's like there's a deeper idea of what this movie is all about. Was that something you were conscious of when you were creating that scene?
I don't know. That movie was like, me and my friends stayed up for like 24 hours and shot most of that movie. It was a real days, but thank you. That's super sweet. There's this one part in Land of Silence and Darkness though, that I think like speaks to what you guys are talking about. And it's that, I don't even remember, it's like that main character. She went blind when she was like 7.
Oh yeah.
And she has like a single memory of like watching a man ski.
Yes.
And then so throughout the movie, I think it happens like 3 times, like this clip of a man skiing will just like be cut into the movie. Like you're just like seeing her memory throughout the thing, and that's just something you like never see in any other documentary, you know. This like creative, like super creative, like you're like showing you what she sees, but she
yes,
you know. Like,
I love that's a great concrete example, because obviously that's not her actual memory. It's building, you know, kind of fictionalization of what she experiences, but it feels more real to us as the viewer.
Yes. Another example is another one of his amazing documentaries, Little Dieter Learns to Fly. Have you seen that, Will? Little Dieter?
I haven't seen that.
Oh, dude, you'd
YouTube
love it. Yeah, it's so great. Essentially, it's about someone who was in war camps. Yeah, prisoner of war in, was it Vietnam or where was it?
I thought he was in Laos.
Yeah, well, so yeah. Some war.
Southeast Asia. He was a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia.
Yes, and he essentially, you know, he did become free some way or another, and Werner has him more or less kind of relive his experience in these POW, you know, camps. But there's a scene in the movie at the beginning where he keeps going around and opening doors, like he keeps opening the door of his car. It might be the opening sequence of this movie. And
he's going to his house, and he's like,
yeah, he keeps opening, shutting it, shut it, and he's like, this represents freedom to me. The idea of a door is, you know, representing freedom. I had a sad moment recently because I heard a Werner interview where Werner said, oh no, I had him do that. Oh. It was like a staged thing, but this goes back to this idea of the ecstatic truth. It's the idea of stylizing fiction that reveals some kind of true thing. So he did see him do something with a door at some point that reminded him of it, but it wasn't necessarily true that this man was always opening and shutting doors to remind himself of fiction.
I feel like that happens a lot in Grizzly Man too, where he's like interviewing those people and they're looking kind of like, I don't know, there's some weird kind of stiffness to the interviews in Grizzly Man, but it's like really good. You know, and it'll like linger. It'll like they'll finish whatever they're talking about, and it'll linger for like 20 seconds on them just being awkward. You know?
Yes, especially with that weird Grim Reaper coroner or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that dude was fucking. Yeah, he can go right back to the haunted mansion where he belonged. Anyways, so to Fitzcarraldo, I think the moment of the exact truth that I heard Werner talk about, there's a moment in Fitzcarraldo when he's meeting the natives for the first time, Fitzcarraldo himself, and he goes to shake their hands, and they have these little handshakes, like they barely do any.
It's this like little
just touch your hand, touch your palm.
Just this like touch.
So of course for us the idea would be that within this culture they don't do handshakes. That wasn't necessarily the case. That was an affection action that he had them do because he thought it communicated some kind of truth.
Which I'll be pulling a couple quotes from his book, Conquest of the Useless. It's just a publication of his journals from the time. And that comes from, and he wrote, and I underline this sentence, "The people's gestures are unfamiliar, gentle, and lovely. They move their hands like an orchestral conductor in time with soft, shy melody that emanates cautiously from the depths of the forest." So how do you show that?
Yeah.
That gentleness in a film, unless you fictionalize somewhat. Otherwise, for Werner Herzog, that's leaving something out that's important about the culture. So
yeah.
Between 3 and 3:15 in the morning in Sicily, I wrote down quickly a manifesto which I would like to read to you. I would like to call it the Minnesota Declaration. Truth and Fact in Documentary Cinema, and it has the title Lessons of Darkness, and the lessons are numbered. 1. By dint of declaration, the so-called cinema verité is devoid of verité. It reaches a merely superficial truth, the truth of accountants. 2. One well-known representative of cinema verité declared publicly that truth can be easily found by taking a camera and trying to be honest. He resembles a night watchman at the Supreme Court who resents the amount of written law and legal procedures. For me, quote, he says, there should be only one single law: the bad guys should go to jail. Unfortunately, he is part right for most of the many, much of the time. 3. Cinema verité confounds fact and truth and thus plows only stones. And yet, facts sometimes have a strange and bizarre power that makes their inherent truth seem unbelievable. 4. Fact creates norms and truth illumination. 5. There are deeper strata of truth in cinema, and there is such a thing as poetic, ecstatic truth. It is mysterious and elusive and can be reached only through fabrication and imagination and stylization. 6. Filmmakers of cinema verité resemble tourists who take pictures amid ancient ruins of facts. 7. Tourism is sin and travel on foot virtue. 8. Each year at springtime, scores of people on snowmobiles crash through the melting ice on the lakes of Minnesota and drown. Pressure is mounting on the new governor to pass a protective law. He, the former wrestler and bodyguard, has the only sage answer to that. You can't legislate stupidity. 9. The gauntlet is hereby thrown down. 10. The moon is dull. Mother Nature doesn't call, doesn't speak to you, although a glacier eventually farts. And don't you listen to the song of life. 11. We ought to be grateful that the universe out there knows no smile. 12. Life in the oceans must be sheer hell, a vast, merciless hell of permanent and immediate danger. So much of a hell that during evolution some species, including man, crawled, fled onto some small continents of solid land where the lessons of darkness continue. Thank you very much.
Wrap up this conversation in regards to Herzog with just this basic idea. How can you tell you're watching a Herzog film? We've spoken to this idea of the ecstatic truth. I would say typically with the movies, there's some kind of element of extreme nature. A lot of the films take place outside.
You might call it primordial.
Primordial. It has a primordial quality. Anyways, so some kind of nature thing. The music of, can you say this person's name? Popavol?
Popavol.
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 Are you familiar with this at all, Will?
My friend knows that. Who is it? A person or a band?
It's one person. He was a person at one time that was kind of like an instrumental prodigy. I'm not exactly sure what the instrument was, but for whatever circumstance, he had to stop being a prodigy and he just became a composer. But he does tons of Herzog's films, and I think it's so a part of the whole experience. So, I don't know, anything else that you guys want to say, how you can tell you're watching a Werner movie? What struck you? Chris, this was your first one, right?
This was my first movie of his that he directed. Briefly, my introduction to his existence feels like it's more fitting for you because it was Paul F. Tompkins doing an impression of him on Comedy Bang Bang. Just like in character pretending to be him was my introduction.
Did he hold a candle to my impression? Or
I think you'll have to check it out.
It's a small candle. That's what I say.
Doesn't want to pick sides.
But anyway, watching this, this was a movie that made me ask how and why more than most movies ever have. Of just like, how was this shot? And then why did they decide to do this? Like, why did you do it? And it's because it seems that he is just an incredibly determined person, especially like as a director. It's like, oh yeah, like we're gonna do this for real, like we're not gonna fake anything, we're not gonna green screen anything, we're not gonna use any effects. That's why like 20th Century Fox or one of the bigger studios was originally possibly gonna fund this, and they're like, wait, that's how you want to do this? No, we're not gonna pay for that. And oh yeah, it's like this is based off the story of somebody who had a disassembled boat that weighed less than this make this trip, but you want an actual boat that weighs like 10 times more and is complete and constructed to do this. How? Just because. Like, because doing it any other way wouldn't be worth doing.
Yes. I mean, all the things we're discussing, you know, I essentially, with each movie, what made me keep putting the next one in was just like, every time I just had this feeling of, no matter what, I'm going to see something, no matter what this next movie is. Will, what spoke to you about Herzog? Wrapping up this idea.
Yeah. Well, in like the past couple of weeks, I've been kind of like watching a bunch of his movies, and I think it's really interesting because he has these like gears. Like Hannah said, he has this certain crop of movies that are like super naturalistic and primordial, and then he has other movies like Even Dwarfs Started Small and like My Son, What Have You Done, that are like, they're almost like Lynchian or like precursors to like Harmony Korine. There's these like, they're weird, surreal, kind of absurdist movies. And then on the flip side, he has movies like Fitzcarraldo or like Cobra Verde or Agare or whatever that are like just like they're almost biblical. It reminds me of like Ingmar Bergman in that way, where it's like, wow, these things, they seem so timeless, almost like if like aliens were to come, like, and we had to show them like 10 movies, like they like Agare and Fitzcarraldo would have to like make that list because they're so human, you know.
Oh my god, yes.
And then he also like has that other gear where it's this crazy documentary style. So he's just a really like versatile and interesting director. Yeah, and I've only seen, I've seen 7 of his movies and seen parts of 5 other ones, and I'm like 1/3 of the way through.
Oh, dude.
Like,
does he have over 60 now? I mean, obviously we could find that easily, but I know it's like a ton, the amount of movies he has.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Well, now you're in Austin, so you're probably lucking out. Like, you probably would have access to Herzog films as they come out. Us in Des Moines, we don't, they don't do wide enough releases that we get to see those in the theater very often.
It's not guaranteed.
Yeah.
Well, so I just found out too. Oh, something else interesting that he does, and we'll probably get into this later. But like, he seems so worldly to me because he's a German director, but for me, he's part of the like new wave German movement. But he doesn't really. When I think about him, I don't really think about that in the same way that I do Rainer Werner Fassbinder. Because with Rainer Werner Fassbinder's movies, you watch them and you're like, oh, this is about German people in Germany, like 90% of the time, And then with Werner Herzog's movies, it's like you can't even predict like where or who it's going to be about. It's all over the world. I just Wikipedia'd him, and he's like just came out with a movie about shot entirely in Japan and using Japanese non-actors. And it's like,
oh my God,
what? You know, he's like so worldly, and you know, in Fitzcarraldo, it's like it's all dubbed in German, I think. But then sometimes if you watch the people's mouths, it's like he's speaking English and he's speaking Spanish. I don't know what he's doing, but it's like it's just he's a.
Well, that brings us to a point. We were, you know, I've just within this last year have learned a lot about this whole dubbing thing. Hannah brought it to my attention for the first time. I was watching Agira, and I was like, maybe it'd be nice, because we were watching it with our 4-year-old daughter. I was like, maybe it would be nice to see one in English.
Yeah.
Because I had always.
The 4-year-old knows what's going on.
Anyways, I was watching it and I was like, you know, I always just assume like, okay, he's German, I should just watch the German version of it. But those movies often have like the other, you know, they have English. But then Hannah brought up.
Yeah, you're not far off when you think of the German dub as the definitive, because Werner Herzog considers, at least with this film, he considers the German dub the German dub the definitive version, even though 90% of the cast spoke English. That was just a logistical thing. It was a logistical choice, because Claudia Cardinale, who's Italian, could speak English, but she couldn't speak German. And Klaus Kinski and Werner obviously are a couple of German boys, but they could also speak English and whatever else. It simplified things a lot.
They had Brazilian actors, you know, and all that stuff in the movie. So they had to have a common court to play ball on.
Yeah, but Herzog said his words were that the German dub is culturally authentic.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
And
of course it is, you little Bavarian.
But Chris, were you having a reaction to watching this film? Because we watched it as a group, the English version, so we can easily, you know, access it. However, were you having a reaction to kind of the weirdness of, like, obviously it's overdubbed afterwards?
Right. Yeah, but I got over it pretty quick. Like, you just accept that as like a trait of the movie, is that the dub will like look kind of odd sometimes, or some of the voiceover is clearly not from that character. Like a different person later is voicing like the chef or somebody, or that guy that was like at the abandoned railroad by himself.
Yeah.
Like, that guy.
Well, and
but like none of that detracted from the movie and like what was happening. It was like, oh, like this is just a part of it. And even some dialogue choices every once in a while, like it's like, oh, that's a weird way you ended that conversation. And now let's move past that. Like we'll get back to like how grand this is.
Well, and of course, we, you know, as a group, we've previously done La Dolce Vita, and we also did Breathless, both films that utilize the exact same technique that we're talking about here. However, one's Italian, the other one is in French, so if it's not your native language, you don't notice it nearly as much. Will, you did the same thing with your film, didn't you?
Dub thing, yeah.
Both the shorts, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's that like as a director doing that?
It's so much easier because the short I made before that one, like I tried to make a full-length movie and I got like a bunch of people to help work on it, and I got to shoot in a pizza place overnight and had people working until 5 or 6 in the morning for like, you know, free pizza. And and then at the end of the whole thing, I realized like just a technical issue, like all the sound was essentially gonna be terrible because we had used all the sound. We had like, you know, shot sound not dubbed. We had shot like live sound, and I just didn't know how to do that properly. So then like being able to dub everything, you can actually just isolate that process and be like, oh, this actually, like I can make sure this sounds good. You know, it's in a way it's a lot easier, and you have like options after the fact if you want to like change a line or something like that. I really like it, but I don't know I think it kind of stands out nowadays though, you know, if you do that.
Yeah, but we can imagine, you know, all of us sitting here in terms of being in the jungle, like there's no way he could have been able to appropriately
the jungle. Right.
The jungle, yes. There's no way that you could have appropriately have recorded sound. So there must be a piece of you watching it where it's like, oh, I see why he did that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's just, the whole thing is so, like, you can tell, like, when they're moving, it's funny because when they're moving that boat up the mountain, you can tell, like, you know, the filming of the movie is actually, like, 10% of what is going on that set. The other 90% is just this like humongous labor camp trying to move a boat above the mountain, you know? So there's definitely like, yeah, you can't put, you know, you're not on a set. You can't like put a bunch of energy into the technical thing. It's kind of like, okay, we're making this amazing thing happen. Let's just capture it, you know, not worry really about like, you know, getting everything perfect on the technical side. You can tell that.
Okay.
Go ahead. Well,
I was going to say, this might be a question for Chris and Will both, but did you two happen to see A Burden of Dreams, the documentary about making this film?
I saw part of it with you two, but I haven't finished it.
No, it's terrific.
I haven't seen it.
Well, and I think this is a good segue for us to get into the production, and, you know, we can kind of tie in Burden of Dreams with that same idea. But essentially, you know, we've kind of alluded to this. What you just said was so perfect about the percentage of what this movie actually is. There's the technical side, and then there's just this whole horror show of nightmares that's going on behind the scenes. But I think this movie is something that transcends, whereas like people haven't necessarily maybe seen this movie, but it seems like a lot of people have at least heard about it because it's just fraught with just like crazy stories of issues and, you know, obstacles that, you know, people were trying to overcome essentially. The main one starting off with was just the ability to be able to secure financial backing to be able to do this film. I don't know the exact number because I actually wrote down a number, but it actually seemed so low to me that it seems even impossible to me that this movie cost this cheap. I have written down here, this movie he initially thought was going to cost $4.3 million, but that seems so cheap to me.
But also 1981, 82 money.
Yeah, so maybe that is pretty accurate. Anyways, essentially what he did is he went to these back-end, you know, and Chris talked about this earlier. He proposed it, and, you know, he did have some success with, you know, securing money, but like as time goes, people are like, dude, you're fucking out of your mind. There's no way we're going to get this boat over. And Herzog's whole thing was, there's a quote with him saying that money is stupid. Meaning that, you know, money has no mind of its own. He knew that to be able to secure backing for this movie, he just had to get something in place, some kind of, you know, act of the movie happening, and then people, be it the dreamers like himself, would start to flock to the project. They'd get so excited by it. So he secured the first amount of money, and the first thing he did was build the boat. And in building the boat, people were just like, okay, yeah, let's do this. We want to make this movie.
Oh, you have a boat?
Yeah. And we should say, so he built one boat, but then he knew that he was going to have to build two boats, because as he was trying to fucking get this boat over this mountain, he knew that it was going to take so much time to actually be able to do it, that he was going to need to be able to film, you know, like the water scene. So there were two identical boats built.
And maybe three. One was destroyed, right?
There was like a model.
The model was destroyed?
Yeah.
Lots of boats.
Lots of boats. I mean, it's just such a, you know, a fantastical thing. So yes, we've alluded to this. The thing is, this is the boat movie. Everyone talks about Fitzcarraldo, the boat movie. The main thing that happens in this film, yes, Chris said, you know, this is a man that, you know, he loves Crusoe, and he's got to, you know, he's got to have his opera house.
Yeah,
anyway,
ring a church bell.
Yeah.
Until he gets arrested.
So,
I want my opera house.
What a wobbly premise to begin on. But then as you're watching it and you realize, oh my God, this is a group of indigenous people. They are building I don't even know what to call it. What is it that they do to get it up the
system of levees?
Yeah.
Stuff.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what's the deal? They just can't access this one. They can't go through this river because of rapids, right?
Right.
And they have to get this rubber so they can make money to build an opera house. What a crazy premise for a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so funny to think about. But Werner says, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's also funny how uninteresting the story was to Werner Herzog. Was it Klaus Kinski? Is that what we decided?
I think it was Kinski during Yagira.
Aguirre.
Yeah.
He wanted him back in Peru. Kinski Kinski's trying to convince him to do this story about this, this Brian Sweeney Fitzgerald guy, and Werner's not interested at all until he finds out there's a boat.
But even then, it's like, that boat's not good enough. I need a bigger one.
I need a bigger one. And it's going to go over whole.
Yeah.
And it's going to go over a hole. Yeah. So Werner's whole thing with this movie is, with each person that he went to, with each backer to get financial backing, they were all down. They were all, thought it sounded like a great thing. But once it got to the point of knowing that the boat had to go over the mountain, they're like, dude, why don't you just make a miniature? We'll do it in a studio. We could figure out a way to make it look like it's going over. And I forget exactly the term that Werner says, but it's something like he kept calling it the plastic boat solution. And at any point he was like, no, we're not doing it. And his whole premise for doing it was he really felt that as a viewer, he wanted the viewer to come in, see this boat going over the mountain, and actually seeing something like that happen. He had this theory that, movies eventually would get to this point where they were also artificially made. This might be one of the last movies where you actually get to see something so real. And the audience would immediately recognize that this is something real that happens. And I think for all of us, the three of us sitting here, and specifically I'm thinking of Chris, I remember us watching it, and I don't want to speak for you, tell me if I'm wrong, but I definitely got the impression, as the movie was going, you're like, oh, this is interesting, cool, fine. But then once that boat, the pulley system and all that starts happening, were you just locked in?
Yeah, and just had consistent holy shit moments.
Yeah.
Just seeing that. And then even, I believe when he was writing the movie, he didn't even write the ending. It was there's going to be some freeformness to this depending on how the shooting's going. And then at first, oh, hey, things are working. And then the boat just comes crashing back down. Just watching all of that and not even knowing kind of what's real, what's not, what's planned maybe, what isn't, was a roller coaster.
Yeah. Well, his direct quote, I did write it down from this interview with what we're talking about. This is what he said. I wanted a situation where the audience knew they could trust their eyes again.
Ooh.
And I think he succeeds in that. Will, what were your thoughts in terms of seeing it for the first time?
That's so funny. That quote's so true. When I watched this last night, and the part where it goes over the rapids and, crashes against the walls and stuff, it's funny because it actually, to me, looks unreal. I, for a second, was like, is this like a toy? Is this like a miniature thing? But obviously it's not because it's rapids, but it's just it's so big and so thrashing against things so violently. And I've never seen anything of that scale, on film. It's it's kind of hard to process, how real it is.
Well, yeah. And there's even shots in there, when, a very famous shot in a lot of his movies, but in this one several times, where it's just a boat on the water. And I'm not even talking the boat, but you can just see all the rapids, it's just this cool, panning kind of shot. And you're just constantly oh my God, they're in the fucking jungle.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. So the production of this, there's just so many stories that there's no real way that we can possibly say all of the things that happen. I'll just kind of, say a few of them that stick out to me. One of them that I heard watching the commentary was there was a worker that was one of the tribesmen. Is that the best way to say that? What should I say? Something like that. Anyway, someone
cast
that was,
member.
Yeah, cast member.
Indigenous cast member.
Yeah, indigenous cast member. Was helping cutting down the trees, and there was actually the world's most poisonous snake that was in the jungle, and all of a sudden the snake bit this person. And typically snakes, there's kind of this myth that if you're in the jungle there's all these dangerous things, but as Werner was saying, they have gasoline cans and this huge crew of people cutting down trees. He's snakes will just, jaguars will just get the fuck out of there. They don't want anything to do with humans.
I believe he also said piranhas.
Piranhas.
Everyone's afraid of piranhas.
Yeah. Anyway, so for whatever reason, this snake was here and bit this person, and they knew they were 20 minutes away from medical attention, and this person knew enough about snakes to know that there's no way we could get back to the medical center in time. So he had a chainsaw, he went, cut his foot off with a chainsaw right then and there and saved his own life.
Wow. Never heard that story. It's crazy.
Yeah. Here, what's the one about the guy who actually died? There is someone that died in this
Right.
movie.
A couple of deaths.
There were a couple.
Plus 2 plane crashes.
There were 2 plane crashes. I can't remember if someone died in that or if there were just injuries, but there was definitely one of the cast members who died taking a canoe out that capsized.
He stole it. That's what it was.
Oh, wow.
I think stole is probably.
I think that's what every interview I've heard say. That's what it is.
Really? I thought it was like took it out without permission.
He had Werner had always like locked it up and warned everyone, don't go for this boat because, whatever, this water is very, very dangerous, and this person did it and died. But check this out. Another thing that happened.
Nice transition there.
Yeah. The person dies, then they go back, and his, now widow back on the, wherever the camp was, they like married that woman.
15-year-old widow.
Yeah, just right away because it was against the law or against.
Yeah, they don't leave widows in this community.
So that happened. Yeah. I'm sorry.
There were, Chris mentioned the plane crashes. One interesting side note. One plane crash that might have been a part of this history in an even bigger way was the Lanza Flight 508. Are you all familiar with that?
No.
It was this plane, 100-person plane that crashed in Peru. Werner Herzog was on track. There's actually a documentary he made about it, Wings of Hope or something. I feel like that's too cheesy as a title. It might be what it's called. The only survivor of this plane crash was the 17-year-old girl who fought her way through the jungle for 11 days and came out, alive. Werner Herzog had a ticket, I guess, to be on that flight to do some location scouting and missed that. So there was a near miss with a almost certainly fatal plane crash. There were 2 smaller plane crashes with multiple injuries.
And even in regards to, the big set piece of the film, the boat and, the logistics engineering wise of getting this boat over this mountain, they did, consult an official engineer, and the engineer said, I think that there's a 30% chance that you can do this without killing somebody. So this engineer actually dropped out because he didn't think it was responsible to do it.
And that's why, so watching the movie, I didn't know any of this stuff yet. I hadn't watched the documentary, but I just knew that there was a tumultuous process to make this movie. So when the boat kind of crashes down and a couple people in the movie die, I was like, did they die for real? Like,
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, it's so believable.
Could have. Like, I was constantly from that point on questioning what was the movie and what was the making of the movie.
Yeah. So, which kind of brings us into this documentary, Burden of Dreams, which was created by Les Blank, who was an amazing documentarian, but he was friends with Herzog. They had an original working relationship through working on Herzog Eats a Shoe, a famous documentary, which is what we were discussing before.
And what were those really rad shirts the whole cast was wearing the whole time?
Oh, fuck, I forgot. Yeah, I forget what it is.
Go ahead,
anyways, this movie, I think, is really what has made this movie so famous, like this whole backstory, because this person went, Herzog allowed him to come on and do more or less an expose of what this is like, and in doing so captures all of the things that we're discussing. And also, as I've heard critics of the movie or just people talking about the movie discuss, like, essentially what you're watching is Herzog at the peak of kind of like narcissism. Like this whole idea of, I'm doing it, man. I'm taking this boat across the mountain. I have to do this for the dreamers, all of this kind of thing. And Herzog, throughout this whole documentary, I don't think seems very happy.
No. But even, I think, in the documentary, there's a line about how, like, even if they get the boat over and everything, like, there's nothing anybody could say or do that would make him happy about accomplishing that feat. Like, it's something that he has to do, but he won't be, like, happy that it's happened.
Yeah. He says I don't think I should make movies anymore. I should go right to a lunatic asylum.
You're bringing out the good ones.
Thanks.
By the way, the shirt was Garlic is as good as 10 mothers. So if anybody's watching Burden of Dreams and is wondering why everyone is wearing a shirt that says Garlic is as good as 10 mothers, it's a documentary film also by Les Blank.
Will, yeah, dude, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. I think it would really inspire you.
Burden of Dreams.
Yeah, Burden of Dreams.
Yeah, I've been meaning to. I don't know why. I've been going through like watching his those like lesser ones of his. I watched just Waldo and the Silence and Darkness. But yeah, Burden of Dreams definitely on the list.
Yeah. Well, and what's cool is we have a friend of the show, Joe G, I'll say. He was just telling me how much he just loves Burden of Dreams, and he was so right. It's like, oh, yeah, that's so cool. But you also get to see, like, more or less kind of how, the German film crew, Werner being the head of, and the native Peruvians, how they more or less kind of get along. So throughout don't, yes, exactly. Throughout the making of the film, they actually had them on two separate camps, right? Isn't that how it worked? Mm-hmm. And the reason for it was Werner really didn't want to influence this group of people. He's like, the Westerners here have a whole entirely different way of living, drinking, smoking, and like playing cards. And then in the camp, they had a whole different way of living. So he didn't want to influence it at all. But did you guys know that the Catholic, like a Catholic priest from this area actually told the crew, like, listen, I don't, this might sound weird, but I do think you guys should actually hire prostitutes.
I think you're realizing. Hey guys, this might be weird. I know it's a little freaky.
But he thought it would cause serious problems if these, if there was any sexual.
There were no sex workers on site. So, and boy, were there.
Yeah.
Even like kind of ties into the movie a little bit when they're getting the crew together for the ship. It's like, oh, hey, can't have women here. What did they just call them? Senoritas?
No senoritas.
Yeah. Yeah, no senoritas. And then, of course, the thing we haven't even talked about, maybe one of the most difficult aspects of filming this movie was, first off, the cast decisions that were originally made that didn't entirely come to fruition.
Probably for better.
So should we just go ahead and talk about that right now? Will, are you familiar with who was supposed to be in this movie?
Not really, no.
Dude, you're going to be blown away. Someone announce it.
Well, Herzog considered playing it himself. He did not.
Yeah.
He mentions Jack Nicholson as his first pick because
that's so funny.
He would be like an island of sanity in the jungle. And then the actual films, they filmed like 40 or 60% of the movie with Jason Robards and Mick Jagger as his sidekick.
Yeah.
Whoa.
The movie was almost complete with those two.
Yeah.
And then Mick Jagger had to take off for a Stones tour when shooting went over time frame, and then Jason Robards got terribly ill.
Yeah, it's like real sad. And actually, the Jagger character, Herzog thought, I've heard numerous interviews with him where he's like essentially saying like he thinks Mick Jagger was one of the most amazing actors he's ever seen. More or less, he's like talking about this idea. There's something about Mick Jagger that he possesses some kind of energy that he's never seen it. So originally there was another character, and this is Herzog's words. It was essentially, I don't know, what was it? Someone with mental illness that was like this English.
He's supposed to be a dumb English sidekick for Fitzcarraldo.
Yeah, and in Burden of Dreams, you can actually see the original footage with Jason Robards.
Yeah, they have the bell scene again with the two of them.
And it is so, for us, I have no idea what Werner's talking about because it's like so embarrassing seeing Jagger do it. He's like, really? We want our opera house. We want it now.
He's doing little hands on the hips.
It will make you cry. You'll be so embarrassed watching it.
Yeah, maybe takes the class down a notch or something.
Yeah, I guess so. But what you see though in Burden of Dreams, then they actually like do, they show Kinski doing that exact same scene, and never has there been a more clear example of this is an amazing actor, this is not an amazing actor.
Yeah, side by side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
Well, and him in the movie, his face is so expressive. Every second he's on screen, like that was probably the most engaging part for me, was just looking at him, and he just didn't seem with it off and on throughout the movie, which I think is kind of intentional.
Yeah,
because even like his character has like these semi-delusional dreams.
Mm-hmm.
And I can believe him having those just looking at that man, and how messy his hair is off and on, and just how intense his eyes are.
It's just his hair.
And yeah. Well, and watching the trailer earlier, like Dustin, you mentioned that your favorite shot of the film was in the trailer, and it is like him on like the roof of the boat playing opera music, and just like this eerie vibe. He's looking in the trees around him because they like know there are people out there that see them, and they're like trying to like just go down the river without being attacked or something. It's just a very tense moment, and he makes that moment.
Can I read a little short paragraph from his book?
Yes.
Use the words of Werner without the accent. Dustin, did you want to read this? Or?
No, go for it. Just for everyone listening, I think at the end of the show, we're just going to read more sentences from this book. So we'll just, because it's so crazy. But anyways,
Conquest of the Useless, you can literally just point a sentence and you're like, oh, an elephant stands for 10 days after it's shot before. Anyway. Okay, So here's the, in terms of casting, Werner Herzog writes, I'm 38 now and I've been through it all. Let's give another 40 years, Werner.
Yeah, no shit.
My work has given me everything and taken everything from me. No one and nothing can throw me off course. The only other one who could be Fitzcarraldo would be Kinski. He would almost certainly be better than I, and after all, there was some discussion with him in the very early phase of the project. But it was always clear that he would be the last one who could see such an undertaking through to the end. So he knows that as an actor, Kinski can do it, but he's such a temperamental dick, basically, that he really worries about the production, and he had some really valid concerns.
Well, and that's the thing, we're talking about this. It sounds like Kinski himself was so fucking out of control this whole movie.
He's really like a pretty great actor, but pretty piece of shit human.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, about him.
Von jetzt kriegst du überhaupt nichts mehr zu... Ja, gut, musst du ja nicht pressen. Musst es ja nicht pressen. Friss, was du willst.
Das ist ja schlimmer wie im Zuchthaus, Werner, du Arschloch. Du willst mir bestimmt, was ich zu fressen kriege? Das werden wir erleben. Das nichts. Das. Oh, so ein Geisteskranker. Glucki, so ein Geisteskranker. Komm, schaff den weg hier, diese Scheiße.
Kriegst du nichts mehr zu fressen. Kannst du deine eigene Scheiße fressen.
Ja. Der muss ins Irrenhaus. Das ist wahnsinnig. Er sagt zu mir, kriegst du selten. Das ist verrückt, dieser Idiot. Du bist ja wahnsinnig, Mensch. Hier muss man nicht mehr die Fresse, die muss man einsperren, weil du nicht mehr normal bist. Voll Idiot. Dann pass mal auf, du. Ich mache Wirbel in Amerika. Pass mal auf, du. Ich sage noch nicht zu Ende, dumme Sau. Hast du so ein Arschloch? Lucky, so ein Arschloch ist verantwortlich für deine Produktion? Mehr zu sagen. Überhaupt nichts. Aber überhaupt nichts. Existierst überhaupt nicht für mich.
Nimmst es, wie du willst, aber ich sag, du sollst dich bitte benehmen wie ein Mensch hier, ja?
Das ist ungeheuerlich.
Und nicht rumblären wegen einem Problem mit dem Fotografen.
Komm, leck mich doch am Arsch, Mensch! Hier, wir drehen einen Film!
Ja.
Und wir werden dich auf deinen Platz zurückverweisen, wo du hingehörst, du Idiot!
Ja, das versuch.
Nein, quatsch mich nicht an!
Herzog himself says, though, like, it's pretty famous that Kinski himself was in over like 200 films, but this is the only one out of those 200 where he smiles.
Yeah, he's so likable in this movie to me. Like, he's just like so lovable and like loving what he's doing.
Herzog attributes that to Claudia Cardinale. He said that Werner Herzog was terrible at working with female and male counterparts, right?
Yeah.
But I remember him saying multiple times that Cardinale was a really good kind of foil to him and could calm him down. And similarly, the woman in Nosferatu as well, right? He had the same comments about her, where they had a good relationship, but otherwise he was super temperamental and pretty awful to his...
Which is why people offered to kill him during the making of this movie.
Are you familiar with that, Will?
I think it just in whispers. I haven't really delved into that.
Well, essentially what happened was the Peruvians, Werner has said that, they had such a different way as people of dealing with any kind of strife that existed within their group of people. So they would see Kinski just going apeshit all the time. And it just... Yeah, it made no sense then.
You go on these 2-hour screaming tirades, and this is a culture that's very quiet and resolves issues really calmly.
So yeah, the chief of this particular group came up to Herzog and said, "Hey, listen, we'll murder him for you." And Herzog's so quick to put on all. He's like, they weren't kidding. Like, they wanted to murder him.
And Herzog considered
Is that right? Herzog considered it.
But needed to finish the movie.
Maybe
It took them more than a year at that point already.
So the scene when, is it like the first time that they really kind of come in contact on the boat, where the chief and, you know, everyone else is kind of sitting around Kinski? Yeah, he has those big old freaky bug eyes that he has, kind of like scanning the room. And, you know, this chief is like yelling at him. Like, that's essentially what that was, wasn't it? Like, he was trying to act out more or less.
He let Kinski be really uncomfortable in that scene to get some of the ecstatic truth from that one.
And it seems hard.
Really intimidating pan flutes that Chris was mentioning.
Oh, yeah. It seems hard to like pinpoint like what Kinski's problem was. I've heard anything from him maybe being kind of like a germphobe.
He was. He said he every time he touched people on set, he would rub his hands with alcohol.
Wow. So yeah, he was like really pissed. The scene where he had to have the ocelot, you know, that big cat, as they're laying in bed.
It's like throws.
Yeah, he just throws it. But apparently
He's throwing animals in these movies.
The monkeys. Yeah.
Ocelots. Anyway.
Anyways, he throws this monkey and throws this cat, and then throws this big fit about it. And then often it sounds like he was just an extremely lazy actor who didn't want to learn his lines.
Another quote I underlined, I was thinking about this. Werner is just kind of, we're on a first name basis. He's just kind of general complaints of the day. He writes, Kinski was complaining and wanted to move out of his hut immediately because a trail of ants had formed nearby. He never knows his lines either.
They were nearby. Like the ants weren't inside. They were just near.
But he was just fussy. He was a fussy man, and I can see why they only made 5 movies together. And even though those tend to be iconic films for both of them, it was a pretty small part of both their careers. I think that's a good reason.
Well, and Will brought up what's it called? My Best Fiend.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, I think just a phenomenal documentary, just detailing their entire relationship. Did you guys get from that they grew up together at some point?
I've actually never seen My Best Fiend.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought you said
No. No, I haven't.
Same house when they were like 13.
Yeah, for some reason they just had like a whole life more or less together. However, Herzog, he thinks like maybe his most famous films are the ones that he did with Kinski, but he doesn't consider his greatest films. Will, what strikes you about Kinski's performance in this film? As a director, I guess I'd be curious to hear what you think about that.
You know, he's like so volatile, and in this movie particularly, like I said before, he's super likable. Okay, yeah, have you seen this movie Passion of Joan of Arc?
We still haven't. We've been trying to access it. I've heard a bunch about it. Yeah.
So it's really good. It has like maybe one of the best performances ever in it, and it's by this woman. What's her name? It's Renee Falconetti, and there's this like dark reality to movies or like filmmaking where, you know, like the best way to make a movie about pushing a boat over a mountain is to actually like push a real boat over a mountain. And in the same way, like with this Joan of Arc movie, she becomes it's just very obvious that she's dealing with mental illness like during the shoot of this movie, and then afterwards there's like a whole mythology behind this movie. But afterwards, she actually ends up becoming like after the movie gets made, she ends up being institutionalized. And anyways, I just think Kinski's performance, there's something to like his craziness that makes it so believable that this guy would try to convince hundreds of natives to help him push a boat over a mountain. There's something like, just like at any moment, there's something real volatile to his performance, I think, in this movie, and realistic, and for some reason the craziness makes it like more likable, you know.
Well, and we're also talking about one film out of 5 where, you know, it's really cool to see how Herzog has this relationship with him through kind of this continuum of film. And each one of those films, you talked about Cobra Verde, even his portrayal of Nosferatu is so cool. So it's so awesome to see that whole thing.
And they're different, you know, they're
so different.
Yeah. Like he's not like a one-trick pony as far as this, like, you know, kind of like, you know, crazy outburst kind of thing. He's very nuanced. He's a nuanced, really good actor. but you can just kind of tell like underneath the surface, like, oh, like kind of anything can happen with this guy, you know, and that like makes for a really entertaining actor.
Definitely.
So there's a ton of legacy just to, you hear the names Werner Herzog and Klaus Kinski together a lot. And obviously I think people who've never seen a Herzog film, except, what was like Jack Reacher or whatever, like Werner Herzog villain version.
That's literally the first time I saw him on screen.
Is that yeah.
I've been wanting to see it.
I actually haven't seen it, but I know he has this kind of breadth to his career that reaches a lot of different corners. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about his legacy, both in terms of his positive contributions to film, and then also I think even when we talk about films like Even Dwarfs Started Small, or possibly Land of Silence and Darkness, or a lot of his documentaries or this film are criticized for being exploitative. Mm-hmm. So how do we balance, do you believe that's a factor, asking you three personally, that is the exploitation of his subjects, or do you think his legacy is overall positive?
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. I actually thought watching it this last time that we kind of watched it together, specifically the use of the actors, or in the screenplay itself, they say bare asses a lot. And then like, obviously there's an inherent amount of racism that just exists in this film, like the whole concept of it. So yeah, just the idea of using bare, there's a sense where it's like there is a certain amount of racism just inherent within the screenplay itself. So I did find it a little problematic this last time watching it. However, in listening to him like describe it within the commentaries and other interviews, I can see it's almost like I can see it from both sides. I can see how on some ways it does come off exploitative, but the way that he looks at the world and the way that he's trying to do this, I don't think he's inherently trying to exploit people. So some of the positives for these people, when they were on the movie, they were paid 4 times the amount of money that they would have gotten paid like typically. Normal daily wages, which they all kind of sounded like a lot of the cast members were lumber workers. So
which makes sense considering most of them were building things instead of actually acting.
Yeah, so it wasn't that unusual for them. Now, of course, for an American actor and for, the price that they would have paid Jack Nicholson, the fee would have been substantially higher. So there is that idea. But some of the cool things, another thing that Werner did was he actually secured that piece of land that group of people lived on. He actually got it so they had the legal rights to that land for years and years to come. So there were actually oil companies that came in there and, cut out like parts of the jungle all around there. But as a result of them being in this film and getting the legal access, they never could access it.
There's like a legacy chunk of land.
Yeah, so there is a sense of nobility that Werner was really important for him. He says that this is the last movie that you're actually going to see an indigenous tribe. He said even 10 years after that point, he visited that tribe again, and everyone had like Nike t-shirts and and even actually a lot of them wanted to waive their fee just so they could get a Honda motorcycle. That's what they wanted for a fee, and he thought it was hysterical because there wasn't even like pavement to be able to.
That's awesome.
So I'd be curious to hear what you guys think about it. I feel like I can see both sides.
Yeah, I mean, watching the movie, I was worried like, what did people get paid? How were they being like categorized? And what were their expectations when they were hired and everything? But then watching the documentary, it made me feel a little bit better, kind of going on with what you're saying, like how compensation and stuff works, but then definitely still having complicated politics. And like one of the camps that they built was then burnt down after they left it because there were people that didn't want them to be there.
Oh, they hated it, yeah.
Rumors and all sorts of things swirling around. It sounds like, especially that time and place, was not great for them to be there.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a sense to kind of creating that distinction we talked about earlier with like journalism versus ecstatic truth. Werner Herzog, he's kind of towing a bit of a fine line, because on one hand he's a documentary filmmaker and he'll fictionalize and everything else, but he also does play the role of anthropologist, because if he's going and saying this is the last Amazonian tribe you'll see on film, all that kind of stuff. Like I said, there's a sense where he does have some responsibility in that way, that maybe he's shirking by saying like, oh, I'm just a filmmaker and they're just my paid actors. But at the same time, it's like you can't have it both. I think that's what I struggle with the most. And when you see something like I mentioned, Even Dwarfs Started Small, when you have an entire cast of little people doing silly things, it's a fascinating movie. And I know the cast who was in it loved it. But at the same time, what image is being projected? And I think if you take the artistic liberty to fictionalize your work, then you also have some responsibility inherent in that.
Will, what stands out to you, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's complicated. Like the most for me, the most exploitive movie that he has, or that movie that he has that rings like most exploitive to me, is actually Grizzly Man.
Sure.
And especially just like something that irks me a little bit, and overall I love that movie, but something that irks me a little bit in that movie is when they play the tape of him dying, his death, and but they're like, okay, we'll listen to the tape, but we're not going to show you the tape. We're not those kind of people, but we're going to listen to it and let you see our reactions to it. Like, that is like good filmmaking, and it's annoying to the viewer in like a good way. But I also think I don't know, there's something kind of like yucky about that.
I agree.
But honestly, with like Dwarves Started Small, and this movie with Dwarves Started Small, it's like, for me, it seems like more empowering than anything. But with this movie, it's interesting because it almost seems like there was like a John Landis kind of situation that happened in this movie, and maybe he didn't get, because it wasn't in the Hollywood system, or because he wasn't Brazil. It happened in Brazil. Like, we don't really talk about him with the same kind of hushed tones we do John Landis, and perhaps it was like different situations too.
That's interesting.
But I don't know. It's tough. I think, I'm sure if I were to know like every detail about the filming of Fitzcarraldo, I'm sure there would be some stuff where I'm like, you paid them like $2 to work for 14 hours or whatever. Like, I'm sure I would be like really irked by some of it. But honestly, at the end of the day, like, I want that movie to be exactly the way it is. And I like think it's so beautiful. And that just, from my perspective, obviously, from my perspective, I'm just like, I'm just glad this movie got me.
Well, I think that's a good thought to kind of end on with this discussion is, and I said this earlier to Hannah, even if something is exploitative or maybe something that's troubling, it doesn't necessarily not make it something that's worth seeing. And certainly with seeing this film, it is such an amazing movie. If you watch this, Herzog himself says that the legacy that he finds in this movie is people who watch this go away from it thinking like, I want to accomplish my own dream. Like, there's something about it that rings true in that way. And Herzog, another myth, or if it's real, he swears to God that I don't dream. He said he's never had a dream before in his life.
But Werner, even Green Ants dream.
No, but they're idiots. I do not dream. Anyways, that's what he said. He says that he doesn't want to live in a world without dreams. And in that way, this movie is beautiful, and it's amazing to see it.
Oh, I'm so glad Werner Herzog exists. I don't think there's anything like him in the world. Just his legacy of films is so different from anything else I've seen. I agree with Truffaut. He said that he's the most important director alive. And I still think that in a lot of ways that's true. So I'm glad his art exists. I'm glad we're able to talk about it.
Chris, will you see more of his movies? Will you seek them out?
I plan to. And I've had a realization about this movie just during our conversation, in that the character of Fitzcarraldo and the story of them kind of parallels the making of the movie and Herzog's brain at the time.
Oh yeah, totally.
Of failed railroad stuff, and then having his entire crew leave him except for 3 people. And funding was a struggle, and finding a place to film was a struggle, and then you literally had cast leave for various reasons, and him just the character being like, I can do this impossible feat. Like, I'm going to do this thing for this reason. I'm like super one-track minded. And directing, being like, oh yeah, like I'm going to move this boat and do this impossible thing. Like, intentional or not, it feels like weirdly like biographical.
Of course, yeah.
Back on the movie now.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I wish that I had that same unwavering determination that he had making this literally about anything in my life. Ever.
Yeah, if I had that same determination when I go to make a sandwich, it would be the world's best. So with that, I think we did a pretty good job kind of summarizing this film. And, you know, for anyone watching, if you haven't seen it, please make sure to watch it. And if you have, I hope we did justice to the whole piece of it. So, Will, before you take off, once again, thanks for coming on the show. Is there anything you want to fill us in with what you're doing down there in Austin? Any cool artistic projects you have coming up?
Not really, man. Not really. It was just good talking to you guys. It was so fun.
We'll have to have you on the show again. So with that said, should we wrap up?
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Will.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Guys.
Yes, everyone else, please check out our next show, which will be all about Cocteau's Beauty and the Beast, with special guest Adam Green talking about that movie and his movie, Aladdin.
And our Beggars Night Film Festival at the Bible Muse on October 30th. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Lantern Cinema, thelanterncinema@gmail.com. If you want to give us suggestions, if you have any questions, if you want to comment on this movie or anything else that we've done. And then, Will, I know you said no projects in the works at the moment. Is there anywhere people can find you, or where you even want them to?
If you Google On Sleep on Heart Vimeo, then my shorts are up there on that Vimeo channel, On Sleep on Heart.
And you got to see them. They're terrific. So once again, thanks, Will.
Hey, thank you guys. It was so cool talking to you guys.
Yes.
Likewise.
Peace and love. Bye, everyone.
When you shoot an elephant, it stays on its feet for 10 days before it falls over.
Our monkey escaped from